Oh, yes. The smartest guy with a boat knife ever. The blogger with the biggest pen. The blog is, I'm a writer. I'm not a talk show host. I really don't know what I'm doing here. And the fact that I have one button to push is almost too much for me. I'm not a techie. But I am a writer and the blogger with the biggest pen. And that platform is Nuganomics.com, the website for the men and women who matter. And they matter because they think and they are willing to act and willing to take responsibility and to move forward, to move themselves forward and indirectly the city as a whole. And I realize I'm not going to be able to talk about Max Weber and the Protestant ethic and spirit of capitalism as I had planned to. You'll just have to tune in another day for some more on that if I can get back to it. Rather, something more important, and that's pressing, that's the news of the day, and that is the Supreme Court decision on internet sales, ending an earlier standard that said a business didn't have to collect sales tax if the seller did not have a warehouse or an office or some kind of physical presence in a state. So there's a new standard. We heard about that, and I've got on the phone the chief I think it's the chief technology officer, Brian Peterson. What is your job again?
I'm a chief technology officer for software consulting company.
Okay, chief technology officer. Thank you for a software company. The question is, as we're asking about this ruling, my listener who runs an internet business suddenly has thought, oh, I've got to deal now with 50 states' tax authorities and collect sales tax if my revenues are maybe a couple $100,000 a year from a particular state. Now I've got to deal with that tax authority that I didn't have to deal with before the ruling yesterday. Is there a solution, Brian Peterson, to that problem?
Well, I think the marketplace is going to create one. And what I think they're going to do is a service is going to get spun up. Somebody that's going to be creative will spin up a software service similar to, say, PayPal, where instead of having to hire someone and manage all the taxes, they will understand the different states' regulations on where it's going to be applied to you as the small business owner, and provide that service and manage the tax collection for you at some fee. And it's just where the marketplace will fill the void that needs to be there, because small businesses won't be, they'll be handcuffed to actually hire somebody as a person to do that. And I think they'll find that there'll be a better alternative.
So the alternative is we don't hire a tax compliance person for 50 states in our small business. We'll just engage for a percentage a middleman that will collect the tax for us, tell us how much to collect from each sale we make online, depending on the location of that sale, and that person gets, let's say, 1% or 0.5% for the service of rationalizing all those disparate tax jurisdiction claims.
Yeah, it could be either a percentage model or a flat fee or per transaction. There's multiple ways they'll handle it, and I think the marketplace will bear that out.
Well, we have on our line Brian Peterson, who is the chief tech officer for a software business works here in Chattanooga, and he's a man whom I have I'll present to you on another matter. It's also a tax matter. It's also a jurisdictional matter as well. He is an entrepreneur with his family, and he runs an Airbnb house in Chattanooga, and is making you've come to a discovery about your relationship with the city government, Brian Peterson, which is telling you that you are forbidden from prospering with your privately owned dwelling through the Airbnb platform. What is the story? What is happening with you?
Well, we've been operating at an Airbnb in Chattanooga for a little over a year, and just a fantastic opportunity, and both financially and just adding to the community. And we received a letter just before April stating that we were out of compliance with a new ordinance within Chattanooga, and we didn't understand necessarily what the letter was saying, but essentially it was suggesting that we could be fined $25 to $50 a day. We were out of compliance. So we went and got a city and county license, and then we went to, I forget what the department was, to get the short-term vacation rental, again, license to be in compliance. And then we were notified a couple weeks later that we were not allowed to have a house in our Airbnb was not allowed to be, was not legal because we did not fall within the city's overlay. With that,
what does that mean? What does that, Brian Peterson, what does the city's overlay mean?
Sure. We didn't understand. So we got online and then we reached out to our district person, Carol Burrs, and to understand the overlay, there's kind of you can get online now, there's a map that kind of highlights the regions within the city that the city council has established and said it's legal for these areas. And you know, roughly it's St. Elmo's, downtown, the ridge that overviews the city, and North Shore would be kind of a general view of the overlay. And our home is on the backside of the ridge. We're up in the Belvoir area, and so we were deemed illegal to have a short-term vacation rental.
And what happened then?
So we reached out to Carol, who's our district person, and exchanged a number of emails. We were trying to get a meeting, and we'd actually on the Nextdoor app we'd put out for any other Airbnb host, of which there were many that were either a current Airbnb host or actually there were several people that were looking to become Airbnb hosts that we met a couple times to make sure we all understood the issue and that we wanted to go forward and meet with Carol, who's our representative. The exchange drug on a while. It was almost 2.5 months before we were granted an opportunity to meet not only with her, but she brought the city lawyer and another district person to meet with us.
Well, that was good because those are people who matter, right? Would you not say that?
Yeah.
She's in the mediation business, so it sounds like she was trying to bring a meeting of the minds on a controversy.
Yeah, to me, I ultimately had to kind of say, look, you're my representative. In a way, I'm a taxpayer. I'm paying your salary. I want a meeting. So I really kind of pushed the issue to have the meeting. And so we had the meeting. And as we sat down, they gave us the historical view of how this came about. So the description was this was going to be a 1-year experiment. And it started essentially, I think, in the October timeframe of last year. And so I said, okay, if it's an experiment, we understand that. But during the course of this year, Glenwood was added to the overlay. And I said, well, why were they added to the overlay, and what can we do to get our area added to the overlay? The statement, which I was surprising, was, well, the way the overlay was originally carved out, some people on one side of the street could have a short-term vacation rental. People on the other side couldn't, and that seemed unfair. So they included Glenwood. I said, well, okay. I'm on one side of the ridge, and on the other side of the ridge, they can do it. That seems unfair. Can we include us? And the answer was no. What was very inconsistent in the explanation was, as Carol said, hey, I'm representing our district, and our district doesn't want this. And yet, ironically, one of her friends and somebody that was there at the meeting with us said, hey, I was actually at the open forum and I didn't hear any dissenting views, and I was a positive view. And clearly there's other options for people to email or communicate. So I'm not suggesting that she didn't receive any negative, but she had suggested she hadn't received any positive. And we pointed out that wasn't the case. But as they articulated the districts, what they ultimately admitted is some districts were like partially in and some districts are partially out. So it wasn't based on a district representation on how they created the overlay. So trying to work with them as opposed to fight against them, I said, okay, what is the method by which what's the data-driven method by which we'll analyze this year experiment and determine if short-term vacation rentals is something the city of Chattanooga wants to do? They said there is no data-driven. We'll just have some meetings and we'll have, people talk, the police can talk, neighbors can talk. And, that's okay. That's not what I was hoping to hear, but I wasn't surprised. So they said, okay, now let's move forward and say you get a positive review. And we say it worked well. Now would the rest of the city be included into the overlay? Or what's necessary for me to get in? Well, we don't know that. And I said, why didn't we include the whole city? So if you're really going to try and get feedback, you would get representation of downtown, which may attract a certain type of crowd versus out here in a more quiet neighborhood where we attract a certain type of crowd. And the city lawyer said, well, we didn't want to include the entire city because if we determine that we don't want this, we're fearful of lawsuits or litigation by taking away a right that people already have. But then in the next breath, the city council person, I can't remember his name, that was sitting next to him said, well, 80% of the short-term vacation rentals were included in the overlay. So again, the rationale behind their decision-making, if you're truly worried about larger litigation, you would think you'd take a smaller sample size if that was your case. So with every moment of just trying to work with them, we were presented with one more barrier. And I said, well, what might possibly be a way for us if you approved it? Their suggestion was, well, much like when you get speed bumps in a neighborhood, you have to go around, and ironically, my wife and I had just accomplished this a few months ago. You have to get 67% of your neighbors to agree that they like speed bumps in the neighborhood, and then the city will enact that. So they're like, well, potentially that could be an avenue for you to get your house included. And I said, well, will the other homes that are currently in the overlay, those other short-term vacation rental people, have to follow that same procedure? And the answer was no. So as I look at it, they've really kind of arbitrarily carved us out and are suggesting that we have to go through, if they would even consider allowing us, we'll have to go through a much different process to be included, and really left us with no option as a result of that meeting.
Well, it seems like you have due process rights, Brian Peterson, Airbnb dad, that are being violated here. There's no way of appealing to have relief. There's no relief afforded you. There's no way of obtaining an exemption or exception, is there, from city government?
No, there was none, which, when you're trying to follow the process and follow the law and work with the city, it's pretty disappointing to find out that no, you just sit on the sideline and you're not allowed to do what your neighbors within the city are allowed to do. I'm a taxpayer. I'm a contributor to the city, the culture. I love Chattanooga, and yet I'm isolated and told, no, you can't have the same rights that people just across the ridge are afforded.
And let me ask you this: do you think that somehow you are legally different, in a different legal situation, or having a different legal status than some other man or family man in that district, in the hallowed magical area, which is the overlay district? Is there something substantially different between you and him?
I would say no, there's absolutely nothing. One could suggest you might look at the neighborhoods and economic differences between the two groups, and maybe that's how they did it. But from a legal point of view, absolutely not.
Well, that's. I'm glad you're bringing that out, Brian Peterson, because that point you're making is, to reframe it in a legal sense, is that the ordinance to create the district violates the ban on arbitrary and capricious ordinances, rules, acts, or activities that make distinctions that are artificial between like parties. So you're told you can't have an Airbnb or similar connection, online connection in the gig city, whereas somebody else can and make a living, have income or have cash flow or have money or recoup money on an investment on a property. He can and you cannot. So that's arbitrary and capricious. In a way, it's whimsical, it's personal, and it's inexplicable how that distinction is made, and therefore it's illegal.
Well, I agree with you. And additionally, one of the things I asked, because if you rent to somebody for greater than 30 days, they said that's legal. I'm like, why is 30 days versus, 15 days or 7 days? And the lawyer said, well, we don't want it to introduce a commercial entity within the neighborhood. And I'm like, well, you look at that from a legal perspective, or just look at it from a logical perspective. If commerce is happening, money is being exchanged for rental, whether that's 30 days or 3 days, it's still commerce happening. So again, it was inconsistent in how they're applying this. It's very arbitrary.
Well, we've been talking with Brian Peterson, who's a chief technology officer for a software company and an Airbnb family man. Brian, thanks for chatting with us and putting a face on a real problem. It's a real problem. And I appreciate. Well, let me ask you this quickly: do you plan to stand your ground vis-a-vis these false city government claims against you?
I do.
Well, we're going to be following you along and encouraging you. And again, thanks for representing all the hundreds of homeowners, Brian Peterson, hundreds of them out there who want you to lead the way and make it clear that they can. In fact, in the gig city, the internet city, the environmental city, they can use the internet and have visitors come and pay them at their houses. Thank you very much, Brian Peterson.
Thank you.
This is Dave Toulis. We've been hearing about a tremendous problem in Chattanooga, again, and inequity. We talk about having inequity in schools. Well, city government has written inequity into ordinance. And this is David Toulis. And Carl, you're live on the David Toulis Show. What's on your mind, please?
Hey, Dave, Mike here. I didn't specifically call for this, but I want to make a comment on it. I think he messed up. He went for a license, which is permission to do something that would otherwise be illegal. And now he's being regulated as a business, and he's going to have a tough fight. I mean, you know, this is what it comes down to. If you have a house and you tell someone or allow someone to stay in your house and say, listen, you know, if you appreciate the fact that I let you stay in my house, give me a tip. I don't know how the state can regulate that. They cunningly coerce you out of your constitutional rights. You know, how does that have to be licensed by the state or the city? So there's multiple, this is going to end up in court for years in Chattanooga because typically lawmakers don't care. They just pass the law and let the courts deal with it. They have no regard, no empathy for the people. We're just going to pass the law, let the courts and the lawyers deal with it. I think that's what happened in this case.
Well, and even the best members of the city council voted for this ordinance. And the ordinance, Mike, is really just a defense of an earlier problematic claim against the marketplace and against the liberty of the people in Chattanooga, and that's zoning. You have to rationalize zoning somehow. And so this, if you don't pass an ordinance of some kind, you're not upholding the fiction behind zoning. So we're going to maintain the fiction that zoning is lawful or legal.
But we have to get the core of the problem. Other than Thurman, Rhonda Thurman, they're all politicians. And the core of the problem is the idea that you want to compel someone to do or not do something. The core of the problem is regulators in general. And that's why the founders restricted government. You say there are good people on there, but there are people that want to regulate you. I don't know how they're good people. I don't even care if they agree with me. If they agree with me and they want to regulate, they're not good people. They should go home and go to work and meet once a year to take regulations down, not to add more. Congress should meet twice a year and then go to hell home. They should meet to repeal 95% of the rules, regulations, and statutes. The problem is the concept that has been torn from the Declaration of Independence and torn from the Constitution to reflect socialism in this country. We've got a bunch of socialists from the doll catcher to members of Congress to members of your local city council. They're regulators. They're no different than that guy that rides or the girl that rides along in the golf cart in gated communities. That's what they are. They're glorified cops as legislators.
This is David Toulis. We're talking with Mike. And Mike, let me make sure, Mike, that you go to the Waterfront Triathlon tomorrow, Mike. It's Saturday and Sunday downtown Chattanooga. We'll be broadcasting live there, and you might see Mike there. You might see, you will for sure.
The radio makes a big debut tomorrow with the Hummer and Leonard.
Yeah, right.
It should be a lot of fun. On the issue of taxation, obviously the state has a right to tax under Federalist 44 and 45. So the tax, people get confused. The tax is on you, not the business. They're just collecting it for the state. So if you're taxed 9%, that's a tax on you, and the business collects and sends it to the state. But let me tell you what. First of all, I don't know how they're going to enforce it jurisdictionally. In other words, how's Washington State going to compel somebody in Tennessee to pay their tax? That's going to be a neat trick. But on top of that, just because you can do something doesn't mean you can enforce it. You know, we're going to pass a law. The law is, David told us, you have to fly to the moon. Well, that's great, but how do I do it? Okay. The second thing is there are businesses that are going to pop up because of this. If I were smart enough, I'd figure it out. How if you were a retailer on the internet and one person came to you and said, for 1% of the sale or 1/10% of the sale, I will do all the work for you and distribute that along the states. You won't have to worry about the regulation of the states. If you sell in Utah, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, you're going to pay one fee to me, and I'll distribute that to the states. And that's going to happen. So actually, this Supreme Court decision is going to cause more businesses to pop up.
Well, a business that pops up because of a regulation is not a real market business. It's just another part of the skimming economy where the state is skimming, and all kinds of crackers like entrepreneurs come up to help out.
Radio and television is heavily regulated. You can't just go radio and TV
Make sure you take my back for our sponsors tomorrow and Sunday, and make sure you see Sam Jordan, David Toulis.
3, 2, 1. Chattanooga Radio.